Hello and welcome to Levels Plus Whenever, episode 139. We're going to talk a bit about Capcom Fighting Compilations today. Thus why we have this gigantic version of the Capcom Fighting Collection 2 art right in front of you. But first, I've got some pickups, so let's go ahead and tackle those first. Alright, I have pickups, so let's get into those before we do anything else. I've got 2 games and 2 books. So game number 1 is Capcom Fighting Collection 2. I'm looking forward to giving that a go in a bit. And then the phenomenon that is sweeping the world, Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Finally got a physical of that. Books. I got the Metaphor Refantasio Perfect Guide. It's dense. It's very thick. And then I also got the Rival Schools Official Complete Works, which is a very lovely book. I flipped through it already. Very excited to be able to add Rival Schools to my Capcom art book set because this is one of my favorite series in terms of illustrations. Alright, let's move into the main content. It's hard to believe that in 2017 when the Switch launched, and now we're in 2025 when the Switch is being supplanted by the Switch 2, to look at where Capcom has evolved in terms of their fighting game remembrances. Generally speaking, in historic terms, Street Fighter and to a lesser extent Darkstalkers have been the games that they have brought back from the dead. Marvel vs. Capcom has had a couple opportunities to be resurrected. Puzzle Fighter came back in an HD format. But in the grand scheme of things, when we look at Capcom's legacy content, it's been primarily Street Fighter when it comes to fighting games. So, when we look at how Capcom has definitely shifted in terms of their fighting game leadership, that has been monumental in terms of getting so many of these games back because they want them back, and why we were stymied for so long on some of these being brought back in any capacity. I do have to talk a bit about Ono, who was basically the head of Capcom's fighting area from probably a little before Street Fighter 4 through most of Street Fighter 5. The only thing that I give Ono any props for was trying to keep brands alive. But the only brands that he really bothered with was Street Fighter, Darkstalkers to a lesser extent, and Marvel vs. Capcom. Your Red Earths, your Rival Schools, your Star Gladiators, your Power Stones. All of those just fell away. And even Darkstalkers couldn't get off the ground as a revival project. Just a teaser at some smaller Comic-Con years ago that was never put on Capcom's official social media or YouTube page, that you have to watch some bootleg video to even see it. That has been talked a little bit more recently, and how some scraps of that project went to other things. But ultimately, Street Fighter has been what has carried Capcom's fighting division for a very long time. And it's great that through these 6 titles, we have had a monumental shift in how Capcom views its legacy, not only in fighting games, but beyond, honestly. I could throw the Ace Attorney games, the Mega Man collections, Ghost Trick being resurrected, Onimusha 1 and 2, Okami being brought back again. They're really engaged with bringing back their classic IP at this point. They remade Dead Rising as well. That just entered my head. They're not sitting on their laurels when it comes to their back catalog. We're getting a new Onimusha and a new Okami game, which I think is fantastic. Capcom has also shifted more so than I think any other major third party in terms of doing all of this in-house, save Street Fighter 30th Anniversary, which we're going to talk a bit more specifically about. Capcom Fighting Collection, all the way through Fighting Collection 2, where it's done in-house by Capcom. Arcade Stadium was also done in-house by Capcom, I think by a different team. The majority of what they're doing is not handed off to like M2 or Digital Eclipse or other companies anymore. They do it themselves. And I think that is really a testament to appreciating Capcom's legacy, going all the way back to their origins in 1981 with Vulgus. Let's talk about their fighting collections. How you can engage with Capcom fighting games in ways that you never could. And even though I did an article on this, what could a Capcom Fighting Collection 3 even look like at this stage? Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection was the first of this bunch to come out back in 2018 to coincide with Street Fighter's launch in 1988. It has 12 games on it. It has Street Fighter, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Super Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, the Street Fighter 3 trilogy, and the Street Fighter Alpha trilogy. And unlike the future games, Digital Eclipse did not put in rollback netcode. They did provide netcode for 4 of the games that were included. And they picked the 4 that they thought would be the most popular ones. So that would be Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, I want to say Alpha 2 and Alpha 3. I don't quite remember off the top of my head which 4 got it. It had a wonderful collection of art, and it had, I believe, a music place that you could listen to the soundtracks of all the games. The problem with Digital Eclipse taking on this project was that it lacks the online piece. The networking piece is not that good. The fact that you can only play 4 of the games is not that great either. There's no cross-play, which is something that none of these games have. But ultimately, it really just didn't feel right in a lot of ways, and it's hard to really explain that. And I can have an easier time trying to explain it with the Mega Man collection they also did. There's just something about how they brought the arcade code into their particular emulation engine that there just doesn't feel responsive in the way that you would expect them to. And you can compare a lot of what they did in Arcade Stadium. You can compare at least the Street Fighter 2 and Alpha games. They feel better, generally speaking, in Arcade Stadium, to me, than they do in the 30th Anniversary Collection. So I think that was an opportunity for Capcom to listen to fans from following Mega Man Collection and following Street Fighter 30th Anniversary, that they needed to rethink how they were going to handle their retro compilations. Handing them out was not proving to work out well. That's not to dig at Digital Eclipse, who have gone on to make incredible collections. The Ninja Turtles collection is one of the best compilations that I've ever played. They needed a little bit more time, I think, to iron out the wrinkles of their engine to really get it to sing. It just wasn't what Street Fighter needed. And when we look at where these collections have gone, several years later, we can tell that Capcom has been putting in a lot of internal work so they can release these as their own personal collections. I gotta give a little bit of props to Beat 'em Up Bundle, because Beat 'em Up Bundle is really the origin point for these collections. Beat 'em Up Bundle was 6 beat 'em up games that has basically the shell that would power Fighting Collection 1, 2, and Marvel. It had their earliest attempt at trying to do rollback netcode in these retro compilations. Wasn't very successful, but it taught them a lot and gave them the framework, MT framework powers most of these, to do what these collections would become. And I want to say that came out in 2019. Capcom Fighting Collection 1, I want to say was 2021, maybe 22. And then we got Marvel Fighting Collection in 24, and Capcom Fighting Collection 2 in 25. And then Arcade Stadium and Arcade Stadium 2 kind of fell in between, but they're a little bit of a different beast, and I'll save those till the end. So, lessons learned from Street Fighter and from Beat 'em Up Bundle. They know what they want to do. They have the MT framework set up so they can release this on the Switch, and they can release it on the PS4, eventually Xbox, and PC, with minimal issues across platforms. I'm sure that was the big reason why they went with MT framework versus the RE engine. So that way they could just make sure that everything was optimized and they could build off of what they'd already done with Beat 'em Up Bundle. Fighting Collection 1 was an interesting collection because it didn't really have any of the big guns, so to speak. Darkstalkers was there. You have 5 of those, and that's half of the collection. That's not to say that Darkstalkers isn't a big gun, but it is not Marvel vs. Capcom, and it is not Capcom vs. SNK, or Power Stone, or Rival Schools Project Justice. The games that I think people were really wanting to see come back. But we got 5 Darkstalkers games. We have Cyberbots. We have Pocket Fighter. We have Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo. We have Hyper Street Fighter 2. And Red Earth. The first time Red Earth has ever been ported out of the arcade. All in all, it is a solid set of games. And all of them deserve praise in their own ways. There's not a bad game really on that collection. Red Earth is a fascinating experiment that looks amazing as basically one of the prototypes of the CPS3 board. And I really would like to see those characters continue to expand and be used in things outside of Red Earth and Capcom Fighting Evolution. Pocket Fighter is a cute spin-off of Street Fighter, Darkstalkers, and Red Earth, and combines characters from all those games for a nice little cute crossover. Puzzle Fighter is very similar, except it's an actual puzzle game, and it's a really good one. Easily Capcom's best, in my opinion. And then Cyberbots is a really cool mech fighting game. I think Armored Warriors as a beat-em-up is even better, but Cyberbots kind of started that, and it brought Gen Cyatome to things, and I think that's important to realize. And then Hyper Street Fighter 2 was not on the Anniversary Collection, but it's basically all of the Street Fighter 2s lumped into a single package, and you can pick between the 5 games which version of the character you want to play as, and then you can play against other people playing different versions. So you can have Street Fighter 2 Ryu go up against Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Cammy, and the sprites change a little bit depending if it's pre-Super or after Super. It's a really cool concept of an anniversary game, which came out on the PS2 and in arcades back in the day. I want to say it was also an Xbox. And it was great to see that resurrected. And then we have the 5 Darkstalkers games, 1, 2, and 3, or Darkstalkers, Night Warriors, Vampire Savior, and then we get it gets a little confusing because there's also two somewhat sequels to Night Warriors and Vampire Savior on here that change the character roster around a little bit, that build off of the mechanics of those games. So like Donovan is tagged in for a actual 3 character or Vampire Savior character in one of those variants. It gets a little confusing. You kind of have to just play around with them, but it just kind of shows the experimentation that they were doing with Darkstalkers that would help lend itself to the Marvel series and where those games went. So they're important. They're a really big part of Capcom's fighting legacy, and it's great that they were all put together. And again, there's not a bad game to be found on Fighting Collection. The rollback netcode is better than Beat 'em Up Bundle, but I would say that it's still not up to the standard that people quite wanted with it. But thankfully, the next 2 seems to have remedied that problem. And it's full of the same features that Digital Eclipse introduced, with having an extensive gallery and music mode, and it has achievements that you can unlock by playing through the games and doing certain things. You can play the English or the Japanese versions of all of the games, which would carry through all the way through Fighting Collection 2. And it's just an excellent compilation. And it really showcases Capcom's commitment to wanting to keep their fighting game catalog relevant in the 21st century. Because practically everything here was in the 90s. When we get to the next 2, we are in Dreamland. We are in Impossibility Zone. Capcom's relationship with Marvel soured after Infinite failed. And Infinite was kind of a doomed project. It was too much corporate mandating and not enough fan evaluation and respect, honestly. So when Infinite flopped, the series just kind of went away. They brought Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 back to PC, PS4, and Xbox One around that time frame. But then they just kind of let the Marvel vs. Capcom series rest after Infinite. And several years passed, and no hide or hair of a new game or even a compilation. It really seemed like that relationship was done, and there would be no Marvel vs. Capcom legacy outside of Fightcade and old original ports and arcade boards. But on the Nintendo Direct, of all places, Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection Arcade Classics was announced. With all of it. All of it. The Punisher Beat 'em Up, and then X-Men Children of the Atom, Marvel Superheroes, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom, and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, all included for what could be a collection people have wanted for years. And again, much like with the original Fighting Collection, it has English and Japanese versions. It even has a few different versions for X-Men vs. Street Fighter now. So you can go back to original release to some updates along the way that ironed out some of the infinites and some other glitches that happened in that game. You've got an extensive gallery mode. You've got music, including brand new arrangements. That's another thing that these 3 games have done, and I forgot to mention it with Capcom Fighting Collection. There's new arrangements by Cap Jams for this and Marvel, and then they just took it to another level with Capcom Fighting Collection 2, but I'll get to that. They got new art done that looks incredible. The passion about Marvel vs. Capcom is so readily apparent when you play this compilation. It's everywhere. Marvel 2 runs beautifully. It is the arcade version that has never been properly ported, because it's always been the Dreamcast version that's been ported because it was easier. And it opened the door for Naomi games, which would be in Capcom Fighting Collection 2. And best online that Capcom's probably ever put into a retro compilation, ever. It is almost perfect. They made sure that this compilation would meet the incredibly high expectations that the fans would have. It's being played now by fans, professionals, and casuals alike because it's that good. It is truly one of Capcom's masterpieces of this generation and one of the best compilations ever made. So they took what they learned from Capcom Fighting Collection, which learned from Street Fighter and Beat 'em Up Bundle, and made the definitive fighting collection that I don't think anything else truly rivals except for what comes after. Capcom Fighting Collection 2 is, in its own way, an impossible re-release. A lot of these 3D games we never thought we would see again. We never thought Power Stone or Project Justice or Plasma Sword would come back. We didn't think that Street Fighter Alpha 3 Upper would see a re-release because they just never bothered. And then, of course, we have Capcom vs. SNK 2 and Capcom vs. SNK Pro, which would require them to work with SNK. And SNK basically kind of set the stage because they released SNK vs. Capcom Match of the Millennium as part of their Neo Geo Pocket Color Selection series. Then they did Card Fighters Clash, and then SNK vs. Capcom Chaos as a standalone release, leading up to Capcom announcing Capcom Fighting Collection 2 on a Nintendo Direct again, so soon after Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection. It didn't even come out yet, and they were talking about it. So it was like, no way, we expected this to not be out now by the time I'm talking to you in May 2025. This would have been like next year. Then Marvel have its time in the sun. No, Capcom is not resting on its laurels. We have Capcom vs. SNK Pro, Capcom vs. SNK 2, Power Stone 1 and 2, Project Justice, Plasma Sword, Capcom Fighting Evolution, and Street Fighter Alpha 3 Upper as the 8 games included. And this one has the weakest game out of all 3 of these, which is Capcom Fighting Evolution, which is just such a mistake. It is such a mistake, and it is important for them to include it because it's showing how humble Capcom is about their fighting legacy, that even their worst product that they ever conceived as a fighting game deserves to be historically archived and included in these types of collections. And that's important. Even your worst should probably be saved, because if you don't, it will be lost to time and no one will remember it. And you have to remember that Capcom Fighting Evolution was the nadir of Capcom in terms of their fighting game output. That was the end game. Then it stopped for a long time until Street Fighter 4 happened. So it's an important game that highlights that Capcom at that point was creatively spent. They had worked too hard on making too many great games and basically just ran out of ideas and just spat out a really lackluster Mugen that didn't need to be made, just to try to make up money on a failed 3D Capcom vs. SNK 3 that became Capcom Fighting All-Stars that ultimately became canceled. There's a lot going on with Capcom Fighting Evolution. And remembering that legacy is important, because it does kind of set the bar really high for everything else, because nothing else reaches that low. Capcom vs. SNK Pro, really fascinating experiment crossing over Capcom and SNK characters. Didn't quite stick the landing with their ratio system being locked to having characters be a ratio instead of being able to select it yourself. Capcom vs. SNK 2 fixes that. We also get 2 versions of Capcom vs. SNK 2, regular and EO. At the moment, you can only pick EO for online. I think that's a bit of a mistake. People would want to play the original arcade release of that online, I think, more than EO. I like EO. That's what I'm familiar with, playing the GameCube version for so long. But Capcom vs. SNK2 is a masterpiece of Capcom's fighting legacy. It plays brilliantly. I'm so happy that it's back. It's my favorite Capcom fighter outside of Street Fighter 6. It's really, really fantastic. And seeing it brought back with an increase in resolution. Something else that Marvel vs. Capcom did is that on Marvel vs. Capcom 2, you can up the resolution across that game, and then I think you can do it on all the others too, just to make the pixels look a little bit better and the backgrounds pop more. Works brilliantly on so many games on Capcom Fighting Collection 2. It really makes games like Project Justice and Power Stone pop in a way that they didn't before, and you can see details you might have missed. It's really incredible. And Capcom vs. SNK2 also benefits because it makes the projectile effects look better. And the backgrounds, you can actually make out some detail you couldn't really see before, which I think is really fantastic. Project Justice is my favorite 3D fighting game Capcom made. It's wonderful seeing that come back. The Power Stones are marvelous and reinventions of the genre that we're not afraid of experimentation, and it's wonderful they're back. Plasma Sword is a fantastic evolution of Star Gladiator, and it's really one of Capcom's only full-on 3D experiments in a standard fighting game. And it was interesting. I played Plasma Sword yesterday for the first time, and I was like, this is kind of neat. I'm glad it's here. And the Street Fighter Alpha 3 Upper remedies a mistake of Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection's devotion to arcade originals by actually putting in the console characters that appeared in Alpha 3 on like Dreamcast, PlayStation, all that. So you get DJ, Fei Long, T-Hawk, Guile, Evil Ryu, Junie and Juri, and Balrog, I want to say, were all characters that were added. And Shinakuma, I think, was also added. Giving the roster even more meat than it already had, and it kind of refines a little bit of the gameplay here and there. All these have online, all of these have a gallery. 3 of them have brand new rearranged soundtracks. Capcom vs. SNK 2, Project Justice, and Power Stone 2. All new soundtracks that you can select. And they're all good. They're all really good. Plus there's some Cap Jam bonus tracks if you pre-ordered. Both Marvel and CFC2 came with a comic if you got a physical edition, which is just a nice little concession. There's so much love that has gone into all of these fighting collections that they stand tall as some of the greatest compilations ever released. So kudos to Capcom's fighting teams for keeping all of these games alive and bringing back games that we never thought were possible. I do want to briefly touch on Arcade Stadium, because Arcade Stadium runs on the RE engine, and each contains 32 games total that are offline in terms of playing, but you can upload high scores and all that. But they include a whole bunch of Capcom's legacy arcade content, including some of their fighting games. So we have like Street Fighter 2, and all of the iteratives of that, except Super. Regular Super is not on these. The 3 alphas are on there. I want to say Hyper Street Fighter 2 is also on Arcade Stadium 2. So you can play all those. Darkstalkers is on the 2nd collection as well. Cyberbots is. Puzzle Fighter and Pocket Fighter also appear on one of these. And there's also a couple that don't appear on the fighting collections yet. The Saturday Night Slam Masters original is on Arcade Stadium 2. They don't have Street Fighter 3. They don't have Red Earth. None of the Marvel games. Nothing on CFC 2 is currently on any of those Arcade Stadium releases. But that's okay. They are great compilations on their own right. They operate a little bit differently because they're on a different emulation engine, but they work well. And again, just a really great way of playing these games if you are not engaged with the online aspect or don't want CPS 3 or licensed games or 3D games. They're really solid. So, Capcom Fighting Collection 1 and 2 and Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection are brilliant. if you have any interest in Capcom's Fighting Legacy, you should own all 3 of those, because they are incredible releases. They really are. All 3 of them, I give my fullest recommendation, and they're some of the greatest compilations ever released, especially Marvel vs. Capcom and Capcom Fighting Collection 2. Because they stepped up their commitment to this series in those 2 games extensively with incredible amount of love. Street Fighter 30th Anniversary is a harder recommendation because it's just not up to the same standard. If you really want online Street Fighter, you probably should go to Fightcade, I'll be honest with you. But I had an article that I had done over on Levels Plus talking specifically about what they could do. And we'll just quickly touch on this. I don't want to regurgitate something that I've already wrote. But the Street Fighter EX games, we could work with Eureka, maybe make that happen. We can maybe get Original Star Gladiator. We can get Rival Schools 1/2, which 2 is a little bit of a refinement of 1 plus Ran and Nagare, I want to say, were added to that. If we really want to get wild, we could go license. We could get the movie, the video game. The arcade and the console versions are different. Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. That will likely never happen, but that would be the true miracle of miracles to make that happen. The JoJo games. Probably won't see those, but that would be interesting. We do have Final Fight Revenge, which was on Saturn hardware. It's unique. Has never been ported. Techromancer and Cannon Spike. A couple more Naomi-based games that would be really cool to include. How about Street Fighter 02-/Gold that adds Cammy, adds a special Akuma mode, Shin Akuma's debut, EX characters, maybe make a perfect version that includes the dramatic battle with that too. Hyper Street Fighter Alpha only appeared on Alpha Anthology. It is a mix of Alpha 1, 2, and 3 with EX characters that do some quirky things, like guy has a teleport. We have Street Fighter Alpha 3 Max on the PSP that add Eagle, Yoon, Maki, and Ingrid. That would be awesome. If we want to get Completionist, we could throw the Mega Man Power Battle games on there. Saturday Night Slam Masters and its sequel. That would be kind of worthwhile including. There's a Sengoku Basara fighting game in Japan that Arc System Works did. And then, of course, Capcom Fighting All-Stars Code Holder, which is the aforementioned aborted Capcom vs. SNK 3 that turned into a Capcom fighting game with Kyo as a guest character, but they ultimately didn't release it. And last but not least, a Fate fighting game that they apparently had some sort of hand in. I don't know how much they actually were involved with developing it, but I'll just say it for the sake of saying it. What would I want out of all of this? I would like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike to have a proper, really good port with new features. I do think Hyper Street Fighter Alpha would be really cool, and I think Alpha 3 Max, as much as that would get into redundancy's sake of having another Alpha 3, but having the complete one would be awesome. I think Ring of Destruction Slam Masters 2 should at least be considered. Techromancer, Cannon Spike, Final Fight Revenge, just to kind of wrap, and maybe Rival Schools 2 to wrap up like the 3D stuff. And if they were to manage to get all that licensing sorted out with Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, that would be amazing. That would be so unlikely, but it would be amazing. And then there's the Street Fighter EX games. That, you know, that too also deserves revival. See, that's the problem. There's so much stuff still to be done that it's hard to even narrow it down. I just would love to see more, I think is basically what I would like to conclude this with. And again, praise to Capcom, which I was starting to say before I got distracted, for working so hard on these collections and making the investment not only to get the licensing sorted out for Marvel and SNK, but just the obvious passion of their retro history that they are cultivating with these is readily apparent and is getting more and more pronounced by the day. And it almost makes me think Tatsunoko vs. Capcom could happen again. That's how serious they've been taking these re-releases. And it's a good thing to just kind of end on this frame of what dreams could come. Alright, well, we'll be getting into Switch 2 Mania really soon. I still don't have a console at the time of this recording. I'm trying. Just hasn't happened yet. But at some point, I will. And we're going to have Summer Games Fest. We're going to have Switch 2 launch. All kinds of stuff coming up very shortly. And I'm taking some time off to work on Femtendo 87 as well. So we'll probably have an update on that in the next episode too. So, I appreciate you watching and listening to me just go on and on about how great Capcom's handling their fighting game legacy. It's truly something to be admired and appreciated. I will see you very soon for a whole bunch of Switch 2 and game news and all kinds of things. So, take care, friends.